Welcome to My Hometown, the program that explores clubs, organizations, businesses, and issues across Nassau and Suffolk counties and sheds light on the different towns that are making a difference.
Hello and welcome to My Hometown. I'm Bill Horan, along with my co-host, Nassau Community College student Matthew Leonard, coming to you live via Zoom and being socially distant as recommended.
Bill, it's time for some full disclosure. Today's guest is my father, Robert Leonard. But the topic isn't about me and my family. Today, we're going to talk about what it takes to be a volunteer firefighter right here on Long Island.
I can't wait to meet your dad, Matt. So let's introduce everyone to Robert Leonard, who is the Assistant Chief of the Syosset Fire Department and a second Deputy Chief Instructor at the Nassau County Fire Service Academy. He's also Chairman of the Public Relations Committee for the Firemen's Association of the State of New York. Robert, welcome to My Hometown on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Bill and Matt, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited about this opportunity to discuss the opportunity here on Long Island to be a volunteer firefighter.
Robert, while the firefighter aspect is very important, you know today the main topic is finding embarrassing facts about your son, Matt. So can you give us the 10 most embarrassing moments in his life? And that'll take up most of the show.
I was going to say you only have half an hour. We need a little more time, Bill.
Well, okay, well, we'll talk to the director about part 2 and part 3 to get those all in. But we're sure we'll ruin his radio career today. So after this, there'll be nothing left.
I will say, Bill, and we're going to discuss this in the interview, when the person joins the fire department, the whole family joins the fire department, and Matthew and my wife and my other sons have been very supportive of me for the last 18 years since we moved out to Syosset, and I'm very excited and proud of his career on the radio with you all here at Nassau Community College. So I'll be nice and we'll hold back on the embarrassing moments.
So in a way, what you're saying, what goes on in the fire department and with the chief stays with the fire department with the chief. That's okay. We respect that. So,
fair enough,
Matt, I'll go back to you now. You can ask the main questions.
How many volunteer fire departments does Long Island have? And can you give us a brief history of volunteer firefighting on Long Island?
Absolutely. So there are 179 volunteer fire departments on Long Island, 71 here in Nassau, 108 out in Suffolk County. There are about 20,000 volunteer firefighters across the two counties. We're probably the most populous and most economically upscale communities, protected, not all upscale, but as a whole, the region protected solely by volunteers. There are only 1 or 2 departments that have some small paid forces, but it's pretty much an all volunteer force. The history of volunteer firefighting on Long Island goes back to the colonies. There were buckets outside your house of sand or water, and if the bell rang, you knew someone's house was on fire, you all grabbed the bucket brigade and joined and helped and put the fire out. Probably the oldest formal fire department in Long Island that I'm aware of is probably Hempstead to the 1850s or so, but informally there were fire brigades in villages and hamlets throughout the island back to probably the 1700s.
Wow. I mean, you really are a source of knowledge about that and all the facts that you've just given us. What does it take to be a volunteer firefighter? Are there minimum requirements that people must qualify for?
There are minimum requirements, Bill, but I want to start with this. I was talking last night with the chairperson of the recruitment committee in my own volunteer fire department in Syosset. The first requirement is dedication. If you're not dedicated to this lifestyle, and it truly is a lifestyle, it's a full-time, part-time job. Then I'll get into the training and what the actual formal requirements are. But if you don't have the dedication and desire to drop what you're doing and go help somebody else in their worst moment or perceived worst moment of their life, then all the qualifications and training and age requirements don't matter if you don't have that time and dedication to do it. In terms of formal requirements, most places minimum of 18 years of age. Some places here now will take firefighters, quote, full firefighters at 17. We do have a junior firefighter program throughout the island, ranging from 12 to 14 through 17 or 18. But let's stick with the adult firefighters. That's our core force of EMS and fire service provision here on the island. 18 years of age. Driver's license not required, but often very helpful. You got to drive to the firehouse to meet the fire truck or drive to the call scene. GED or high school diploma usually is a requirement in most places, but not always. And then any other training we provide for you. So you got to be physically fit. You take a medical with our doctor, whichever respective fire department you join has a physician. We follow a national standard for physicals for firefighters in terms of preparedness. You've got to wear self-contained breathing apparatus, be able to carry heavy things. So your doctor or our doctor will check you out. And then we send you off to training. Nassau and Suffolk both have very progressive and aggressive training programs at the countywide fire academies. We're very lucky. I happen to, as you mentioned in the intro, work at the Nassau County Fire Service Academy. It's about 180 hours of training in the first year and a half to 2 years as a firefighter. If you choose the path of emergency medical services, that's also about 150 to 180 hours of training in your first year of formal training. So you got to prepare your family, whether you're a student, a dad, a mom, a son or a daughter. I'm going to be out of the house, mom or dad or husband or wife, for this amount of hours a week training. My department, we did a little formula. We think your service time per week in the fire department is about 10 hours a week between training, going to calls, meetings, drills, and other obligations. And some weeks it's 6 hours, some weeks it's 12, some days it's 0, some days it's 4. But it's a very fluid but dedicated lifestyle.
Robert, do you find, I'm just wondering, are any backgrounds more preferable? Someone who's been in the service, a track star, maybe a nurse, any kind of backgrounds that help more than the others?
I think those things might give you an advantage or a leg up, but the training is such that anybody can do it if you're physically fit and have the capabilities. And it's funny, in a community like Syosset, where the home prices are such that we don't have a lot of kids staying here. You know, Matthew is a student in your school, and he's going to be 20 years old in about 2 weeks, and he's still living at home. But once kids hit 24, 25, 30, they move to Manhattan, or they move to someplace else or down south, and they come back at 35 or 40. So they join at 35 or 40, and they say, I'm not sure I can do this. We've had people join at 50, 55, 60. If you're physically fit and capable of doing the work, you can be a volunteer firefighter. So I think there's some advantages to having an athletic background, a medical background, a hands-on tools background, but we've taken accountants and lawyers and doctors and turned them into great firefighters as well.
Well, you mentioned that training program earlier and how long it takes, and I assume it's a rigorous training. What does someone learn when they first sign up, and are there tests that they have to take when they do that?
So there are tests in the classes, and they're really tests based upon the subject matter. The firefighting classes in particular have a little more physical to them than the EMS classes. In the EMS class, they'll be carrying equipment, carrying patients, but the firefighting is climbing ladders, dragging hoses. So if someone maybe has a medical situation where they have asthma and they can't really wear a self-contained breathing apparatus, they might become a emergency medical member. But in terms of firefighting, it's the basic skills you see if you ever watched a fire fought on television or in a movie, and in the movies they are a little dramatic. It's climbing ladders, carrying heavy equipment, if need be, God forbid, dragging a victim or a fellow firefighter out. And there are techniques, and you'd be surprised. Some of the smallest people in terms of stature, to Bill's point about characteristics, are some of the best firefighters. Some of the biggest people are great at it too, in terms of strapping men and women and athletes, but there are leverage points in physics, some of the things we learned in school on how to move people and move equipment around.
Robert, by the way, on behalf of everybody, before we get too far into the show, I just want to thank you and the other members of all of the volunteer fire departments for what they're doing for Long Island and for any town in the country. It's a great sacrifice you're making, even though you probably love it. I think the fire people I know truly enjoy what they do, but you're the guys out there saving us. And when push comes to shove, and it might be that one time in life that something happens, it might be a small, somewhat backyard fire, so to speak, but you're the guys we call on. So thank you, and the members of your, I don't know if it's called a fire troop or a squad, or firehouse, I guess is the term. Is that it?
Yeah, well, a firehouse would be a local subdivision. The overall organization is kind of the fire service. Is the term we like to use. And thank you, Bill. We appreciate that. I think the biggest thing people can do is to recognize their local volunteers. One of the things we see, we talk about recruitment and retention. We're discussing today a recruitment event in late April that we'll get to in a couple of minutes about recruiting new firefighters, but it's equally important to retain the ones we have. And part of retention is recognition. We don't get paychecks. We do get some modest benefits like discounts on our property taxes and some help from the town with memberships for the golf course or the pool or access to certain services. But the biggest paycheck we get is the psychological paycheck, as a friend of mine once called the thank you. Being acknowledged by your community with a thank you letter after saving a person in an emergency or performing CPR and resuscitating a patient and seeing them come visit the firehouse after suffering cardiac arrest. Nothing really beats that. And we appreciate the gratitude that's shown to firefighters. Firefighters are held in pretty high esteem, and it's our responsibility to earn that trust and respect that we get from the community here in Long Island.
How are recruitment numbers going these days with the pandemic and everything else? Are they heading upward, downward? Is there a cause effect that you would glean toward whichever way it's going?
Yeah. So in the big picture, stepping way back, Bill, in the 1980s, we probably had 130,000 volunteer firefighters across Long Island. That kind of began to slide down in the 90s up to almost 2,000 to somewhere around 100, 110. Post 9/11, there was an uptick, a great deal of patriotism and dedication and reverence for the work that the FDNY and others did at Ground Zero and the sacrifices that were made. And then we got into the early 2000s, and we have two-income families and challenges. So across the state, numbers have been down. Long Island, luckily, has kind of held our own, roughly around 20,000 for about as far back as anybody can recall. But our challenge on Long Island is a little bit different. It's a demographic shift. Our members are getting older. Where the average member age might have been 30 or 35 or 40, it might be 60 now. So you have a 25-year-old and a 70-year-old. I have a dear friend who's still driving the fire engine at 79. He's a very talented engine chauffeur, gets us out to calls all the time, and he's counterbalanced by an 18-year-old at the spectrum. So our average age is moving up. As that average age gets higher, the ability of those members to perform, at 65 or 55 versus what they did at 25 is a little bit different. So while Long Island has held its own in terms of aggregate number of firefighters, we need to keep refilling the bucket from the bottom with younger, and younger could be 40, younger could be 35, could be 18, people who bring the physical attributes necessary to do some of the harder physical work, while the older members can transition into fire police, which is traffic control or support functions or administration or driving the trucks and things like that.
You are listening to My Hometown on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Matt Leonard. I'm along with Bill Horan, and today we are talking about becoming a volunteer firefighter on Long Island. Our guest today, once again, full disclosure, is my father, Robert Leonard, who is the Assistant Chief of the Syosset Fire Department and the Second Deputy Chief Instructor at the Nassau County Fire Service Academy. He is also the chairman of the Public Relations Committee for the Firemen Association of the State of New York. And as I just mentioned, the Firemen Association of the State of New York, can you tell us more about that and their program called Recruit NY?
Sure, absolutely. So the Firemen's Association of the State of New York, ironically, was formed after the Civil War because the volunteer firefighters in New York City were now being replaced with a paid fire department, and their well-being and long-term care was in jeopardy and concern. So they formed a fireman's home in 1872 up in Hudson, New York, where firefighters from Brooklyn and Queens, people don't realize that there actually still are 9 volunteer fire departments in the 5 boroughs. There were hundreds at one time in the 1800s and early 1900s, could have a place to go and live out their final years in a retirement community, be taken care of. It evolved over time more so now. FASNY, the Firemen's Association of the State of New York, is the trade association for the roughly 85,000 volunteer firefighters across the state. And Bill, to the point earlier, I didn't quite get to the whole time continuum. The state went from 135,000 firefighters to 120 to 110, popped up and down, and now we're down to 85,000. So statewide, we've had some challenges. So about 12 years ago, the Firemen's Association came up with the idea for National Volunteer Week, which is the last week of April, to hold a statewide recruitment open house, to open up as many firehouses as possible, to invite the public in to come see what it takes to be a firefighter. Come try on the equipment. Come speak to men and women who are very similar in situation to you, maybe have the same job as you. Your kids grew up together. How they are firefighters, how you can do it as well. The challenge for this year, though, is we're doing Recruit New York open houses in a pandemic. So what FASNY has done is we've created a toolkit for local fire departments to run virtual open houses. I do feel we started the idea of the virtual open house program late in 2020. With the vaccination and more restrictions being lifted by late April, I think some firehouses, even on Long Island, might be able to have an outdoor open house with safe distancing and masks in place. But for those who can't, we're going to have virtual open houses. What does that mean? Well, the fire department may put up a Zoom link and invite you to take a Zoom tour of the firehouse or go Facebook Live from the firehouse and now touch their entire community rather than maybe the dozen or 15 or 20 people who'd come to an open house. Traditionally, we've done a lot of our recruitment around Fire Prevention Week and month in October. And that's a typical time when people bring their kids to the firehouse. And while the kids are there learning about stop, drop, and roll, we grab the mom and dad aside and say, hey, you should consider joining the fire department. Now we want to do something about 12 years ago in April, 6 months opposite that October date. So we're recruiting on an ongoing basis throughout the year. So for the 24th and 25th of April, Saturday and Sunday, you can go to recruitnewyork.org. That's recruitnewyorkny.org and look under participants and see which departments in your community in Nassau and Suffolk are participating in the program.
That's a great, and we're going to ask you for that again later on so that people know about it and have that opportunity. Because personally, I've experienced that people who work with the fire department, I don't know why, you might be able to answer this, seem to love what they do. I played golf with a famous high school coach once, and he had 3 sons. 2 of them were on Wall Street making a ton of money, and they were miserable every day. The son, who was the fireman, was happy going into work, loved what he did, loved his coworkers. And maybe that just says a lot about humanity, but it seems the firemen have a very close allegiance, camaraderie, and honestly enjoy what they do.
Yeah, and I think that applies to both the career or paid firefighters and the volunteers as well. I was very good friends and shared an office next door to Pete Gansey, who was the chief of department of the FDNY on September 11th. And Pete said to his peers for years, and this was repeated in his eulogy, amongst his parents, friends in Farmingdale, the happiest guy was the guy who worked in Ladder 120 in Brooklyn. Every day he went to work, he smiled. Every day he came home from work, he smiled. And that's the same thing with the volunteers. It's that dedication I mentioned at the top of the show. If you're dedicated to the mission and you really want to serve your community, you're going to be happy about going out 3 o'clock in the morning. Not many of us are happy going out 3 o'clock in the morning. Mrs. Leonard's not happy when I go out 3 o'clock in the morning. Our new dog isn't happy when I go out 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not even necessarily happy, but I'm happy to serve. And when I get there at that 3 a.m. call, even if it's a minor call, but it was perceived to be that person's emergency, that's why we're there to help. So we try to be generally a happy lot.
I'm just laughing as you say that, because if you were my neighbor, you going out at 3 o'clock in the morning would get my ever alert dog awake, and she would awaken me to let me know that you were going out at 3 o'clock in the morning. So basically, most of the neighborhood would be awake as you go down the street, you having a good purpose, but the rest of us just a noisy dog who's driving everybody crazy. Matt?
To which I would take a chance to recruit you and say, Bill, you're up anyway. Why don't you join and come to the call with me?
I'm right. I'm up anyway, right?
He's a great spokesperson, isn't he? He's a good recruiter.
He's fantastic, yes. He's got me excited about this.
How has the pandemic affected everyday operations at a local firehouse, and how has it affected the recruitment process more specifically?
That's a really, really good question. The pandemic has been a tremendous challenge for all of us, medically, psychologically. I hope everyone listening is well or relatively well. I know some people listening sadly have lost someone to this terrible virus, and our sympathies and heartfelt condolences are with those. We hope we're all evolving out the other side of this. But to answer your question more directly, Matthew, initially the pandemic created some challenges to operations. I wasn't the chief then, but I was involved in some things at work with my office in terms of closing down the office and precautions and whatnot. So we were lucky enough to have one of our assistant chiefs, my boss in the fire department, is a doctor, and he's a physician at Cohen's Children's. So he ran our program of, quote, closing down the firehouses, but we couldn't close down service. We closed down my office and I worked from home, but I couldn't respond to Bill's call for help from home. How would I wake up his dog at 3 o'clock in the morning if I was working from home in the fire department? So we changed our protocols. We changed our protocols for the training academy. We limited class sizes once we reopened last June. We continued training recruits. We've told fire departments, you can't stop recruiting because of a pandemic. We've had some of our own current members and even potential members say, my wife or my husband just doesn't want me really out playing with fire trucks and ambulances during the pandemic. But we've reminded people the calls didn't stop. One of the things we saw across the state, statewide, was a general downtick in, say, automatic fire alarms. A major problem for us is malfunctioning automatic fire alarms, or sometimes properly functioning but nuisance fire alarms. You burn the toast in the office and the alarm goes off, and before you can call the alarm company, we show up. Those went down. What went up was actual calls for kitchen fires. People were home for those first 2-3 months cooking at home much more than they had in the past. They weren't used to cooking. They weren't accustomed to cooking with their kids running around doing Zoom school or the dog or what's going on in the kitchen. So across the state, we saw an uptick in fires, and relatively minor fires in kitchens. So we did some safety education on that. But in terms of recruitment, Syosset saw a bit of a, sadly, silver lining in this pandemic. We had 6 people join our department in December. 5 of them were college students, all of whom would have been away at college had it not been for the pandemic. So they were now Zooming to schools across the region or the nation from home, and were probably planning on doing that for another year or so, so they joined the fire department. So some departments saw an uptick in terms of response. Most of us were working at home. Matt knows my schedule. I kind of leave around 7:30 in the morning for work when I'm working in the city. I come home around 6:30. I'm gone those 11 hours a day. I was now home, and if between Zooms or phone calls I could run to a fire call, it was an additional resource. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, we actually had an enhanced response of our members because they had more availability because of proximity. They were home. As the pandemic has proceeded and jobs have reopened and some of our members are firefighters, cops, nurses, other essential workers. They've worked very long hours, so we need to fill in those gaps. So we need to recruit more people to continue to serve our communities.
Robert, I would compliment those people who joined the fire department during that time, because I'm just thinking, assuming they have, of course, the right intentions, they want to give it a try and enjoy doing it, the volunteer work. But what a great item on your resume. If I saw someone with that on, they're definitely getting points right away. Now, that they might have things that take away those points, but that they're willing to volunteer for their community, that they have leadership, that they have desire. Just a good citizen says a lot about them. And I'm sure being part of a volunteer fire group certainly teaches you a lot of life lessons.
I think it really does. I think it does at all points in life. I think it's a way to make friends. If you move to Long Island, and many people move to Long Island don't realize that we're virtually all volunteers out here, with a couple of exceptions out of 179. They think because we look like the FDNY and dress like the FDNY and act professional that we're all career paid firefighters, and we're not. When we moved to Long Island, we didn't really know anybody in Syosset. We had a couple of cousins in town. That was it. I immediately made 120 new friends by joining the Syosset Fire Department. Now, I had the advantage of being a firefighter in another department in Queens for 13 years prior. But even as a new recruit, you suddenly have 120 or 150 brothers and sisters from across your community, people you see in the store and you wave to them. And my wife can't go out without running into a firefighter at ShopRite or at other stores in town.
And that really is important, because obviously I want to know the right person to call if I have an emergency. And that leads me into the question, what else that we might not really think of do people in the firefighting business take care of and get calls for? What other type of emergencies do you handle?
That's a great point, Bill. It's the fire department, but really we're the emergency service department. We handle just about everything. And that's evolved, especially in recent years, with more and more natural and man-made disasters out there. During Isaias, Matthew saw I was gone for probably 15, 18 hours running from place to place, dealing with everything from power lines down to fires, to car accidents, to floods, in the course of just one day. Throughout Sandy and throughout Irene, we had the same situation. On September 11th, the volunteer fire departments across Long Island and in the days after mobilized and went into the city and covered FDNY firehouses in certain communities to assist. So we're involved in terrorism training. Sadly and tragically, we have all had to take active shooter training. Many fire departments run the ambulance service in the community in addition to fire services. So who's going to come with the ambulances? God forbid we have a school shooting or a church or one of these movie theaters, or the tragedy in Atlanta last week. While Nassau County is lucky to have a paid police ambulance service, Suffolk is all volunteer ambulance corps or volunteer fire department ambulances. So while we may be volunteers, we put ourselves in harm's way. So our mission is broadened very much past the bucket of sand or water outside the straw house in colonial days to we do technical rescue, we do trench rescue, we do auto extrication, we do water rescue. So our skills have broadened greatly.
You are listening to My Hometown on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Matt Leonard, and I'm with Bill Horan, and today we are talking about becoming a volunteer firefighter on Long Island. Our guest today is my father, Robert Leonard, who is the Assistant Chief of the Syosset Fire Department and the Second Deputy Chief Instructor at the Nassau County Fire Service Academy. He is also the Chairman of the Public Relations Committee for the Firemen's Association of the State of New York. And speaking of that association yet again, I understand that something big is happening April 24th and 25th you want our audience to know about. Please tell us more about this event.
Absolutely. So we covered it briefly before. We'll go over it again because I think, Matt, you're right. It is worth repeating. Recruit New York is a statewide open house program by the Firemen's Association of the State of New York. We encourage as many of the 1,800 volunteer fire departments across the state to open up their doors, either physically or virtually that weekend, to allow community members to come in and experience what it's like to be a firefighter. Traditionally, until last year, the first 10 years of Recruit New York, you came in and you tried on some gear. You maybe were given an opportunity to see a firefighting drill by the actual fire department members. You were able to ask questions and get your interest out there and also get your questions answered. We're going to go to virtual this year, or at least advocating virtual to most places, and we'll allow local fire departments to make judgments based upon protocols and COVID in their community. Some of my friends upstate, the COVID rates are very, very low. So they're probably going to be in places around Syracuse and Buffalo and Watertown are going to hold true physical open houses, but here on Long Island, we're advocating, at least for the most part, virtual open houses. So go to recruitny.org, look for the participants tab right on top, and listed county by county, every county in the state, all 62, you will see the volunteer fire departments in your community that have open houses, their hours, and if they're doing it virtually, the access point, whether it's a Zoom call, a Facebook link, some other form of virtual media. We think it's very important that people invest the time that weekend, the 24th and 25th, to learn about your fire department. We recruit people all year long, but by having a focal point that weekend, we're going to have 6 or 8 press conferences across the state that week, in the week before, including hopefully one here on Long Island with the county executives from Nassau and Suffolk. By the time this show airs, hopefully that press conference will have happened. There'll be television news stories, ads, online marketing, as well as organic social media. We'll be coming at you from every direction. So please come back at us on the 24th and 25th and visit your local firehouse, either in person or virtually, and learn more about how you could be a volunteer firefighter or emergency medical service member in your community.
Robert, let me ask you, and again, thank you on behalf of everybody for everything you and the members of your firehouse do. And just to pass along to anybody who's volunteering, they're giving up some part of their week, whether it's 2 hours or 20 hours. But can you tell us if someone is interested and says, well, you know, I might not be up to the physical work, maybe due to a lack of mobility or something, but I would like to be part of this effort. I would like to volunteer or help the local fire department. What could they do to be a part of things and to help your efforts?
Absolutely. And it varies by the fire department, Bill. I'm going to give you an overview, but each 179 fire departments on Long Island have a different approach. Most departments will have an auxiliary program, and it used to be called a ladies auxiliary, but we are welcome to all members. So if you are an accountant and you want to come help out with the books, or you are a mechanic and you want to come help fix the trucks, or you are somebody who is involved in public education, you want to be part of the group that does that. There are opportunities in many departments to join as an associate member or a non-firefighting member to be involved in those activities. We do really need, though, men and women to go into the fires and go into the calls. We appreciate everyone else's efforts. And as I mentioned earlier, as our members age, they tend to take on those support roles. So a person who's a 50-year member who's 65 or 70 years old might be the fire police person with the wand at the end of the road protecting us from traffic and controlling the flow of civilian cars. So we'd love to encourage people most to come be active firefighters and EMS providers. But if they can't and they want to help their community, we'll have a role for you. We're more than happy to have you come and join us. I want to ask Matt a question, if that's okay, Bill.
Sure.
and it's not an embarrassing question, not one of those 10. Okay. So, Matt, how does it feel being a family member of a volunteer firefighter, if you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. And it's a commitment just as you guys do. As I was not as big of a commitment because you guys are the one running into burning buildings and saving people's lives, but it's a commitment knowing that my father is running into a burning building and most people's aren't. And it's a mental commitment, and it's just it's partially a time commitment as well. But I think it's very rewarding when I tell people that my dad is the chief of the fire department, and it's a sense of pride for all of us here. So
I'm just going to jump off that point there. When we encourage people to join the volunteer fire department, we also tell them that the entire family is joining the fire department. It's a commitment by the spouses, the children, the entire family. We all are involved in this together. They're sacrificing their loved one. I mean, sadly, we just saw in Spring Valley upstate last week, they literally lost a family member. 2 young boys lost their dad at a fire. But it's the little losses every day of us running out to calls and having to leave soccer practice to run to a call or interrupt a family meal or something like that. So it is a family commitment to join the volunteer fire department.
Robert, we want to thank you and let our audience know we've been speaking with Robert Leonard, the Assistant Chief of the Syosset Fire Department and Second Deputy Chief Instructor of the Nassau County Fire Service Academy. He's also Chairman of the Public Relations Committee for the Firemen's Association of the State of New York. Robert, good luck to you, and thank you and your firehouse for all the great work you do.
Bill, thank you for having me on WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College.
You got that in. I'm Bill Horan. I'm here with Matthew Leonard, and we thank you for listening to this week's edition of My Hometown.
We like to get your feedback on My Hometown. Send your comments to WHPC@ncc.edu. Nassau Community College, where success starts and continues. Till next time, this is Bill St. James. And remember, there's no town like your hometown.